I think it's an example of where they just went, World War Hulk. Hulk's a gladiator. We like this idea. Are we going to explore this to its fullest extent and actually make something cool? No, we just want to see Hulk and Thor fight. So we're going to have them go on this whole side quest that has nothing to do
True.
with fighting Hela. And we're just going to get this
True.
one good scene here, which I think proves my point that this movie is built around specific sequences they wanted you to see as the audience. And one of the, like, if you watch the trailer is built around Thor and Hulk fighting. That
True.
was their
Yeah.
way of advertising this movie.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I am your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite co-hosts, Andrew, to review the third in the Thor series, Thor Ragnarok. This was a 2017 film that was an American superhero film, in case you were not familiar, but it's directed by Taika Waititi and written by Eric Pearson, Craig Kyle, and Christopher L. Yost. Now, initial impressions, Andrew, what are your thoughts? I know we've reviewed a lot of these so far, but this one deserves its own opinion. What is your impression of seeing Thor Ragnarok?
So much potential, but it just turns into a half-hearted comedy. And it does about as good as the previous Thor movies. Although I think I liked the first one quite a bit, so.
Yeah, okay, I was not expecting that, to be honest. I thought this was gonna be a glowing pandering of Thor this time, because I recalled watching this the first time and thinking, wow, this is actually very enjoyable. I liked it a lot. And then watching it this time, I realized there was a lot of things very wrong with this film. And so needless to say, we're on board on this one, but we'll see when we get to the rating. But before we do that, Andrew, you want to give everyone a summary of what Thor Ragnarok's about if they haven't seen it?
The story of Thor Ragnarok picks up where Avengers Age of Ultron and Thor the Dark World left off. Loki is currently reigning in Asgard posing as Odin, and Thor is traversing the 9 realms, seeking adventure and looking for the remaining Infinity Stones after the events of Age of Ultron. Upon confronting Suitor, Thor realizes that, oh shoot, Odin isn't on Asgard, and it must be Loki. He returns, confronts Loki, looks for his dad, finds his dad dead, and then they realize all the lore that happened before Thor was even born, with Hela and Odin conquering the 9 realms, and then Hela being locked away, presumably within Hell. And thus a conflict ensues, and Thor is cast out of Asgard for the second time, this time losing his hammer and having to face the world in the 9 realms without it. After joining forces with a lost Valkyrie, a despondent Hulk / Bruce Banner, and his brother Loki once again, they go back to confront Hela and save the Asgardian people.
Yeah, that's a pretty decent summary. We'll get to one of those points in a second because I am curious if I just misunderstood what was going on. But before we get into that, of course, we do the rating, the review. Andrew,
You go first.
I knew you were going to hit me with that, you piece. Okay. Yeah. Well, after careful analysis and double and triple checking my numbers, I gave Thor Ragnarok a 4.0.
Holy crap. I gave it a 3.95.
Okay, so technically I actually gave it a 3.95, but I rounded up because I thought I might have counted wrong because the website wasn't working for some reason. That's crazy. That is actually insane.
And I did. I quadruple checked this, and I added all the numbers together, and I was like, all right, okay, we put that many points there. Okay. Well, I was like, wow, I can't believe I'm giving this such a low rating.
That's what I thought too. That's why I kept checking my numbers. I was like, this is not what I would call at all. So we'll get into that today. Amazing. I am very curious. But yeah, keep listening if you're curious why we got that rating. Andrew, we're going to kick it off as we always do with that initial impression on the opening scene, right? We have Surtur, I believe his name was. Surtur. Whatever. The flame dude that was imprisoning Thor as he gives a little monologue on what's going on. The monologue is pretty traditional, if you will, into the Thor franchise at this point because they've done it for all the previous ones. This time it's just Thor instead of Odin who's giving that initial monologue. And then we get into the little fight and he goes back home to face Loki. What was your impression on this reintroduction to the Thor franchise?
I think the opener is great. I mean, I said it about the last movie, Thor: The Dark World. So me thinking the opener is great does not mean I think it's a great movie, though. Um, I really love the usage of the immigrant song in this opener. You get to see Thor just absolutely beating the crap out of all of these fire demon whatever aliens. Um, the As far as just that scene goes, I thought it was great. And then you get Thor being reintroduced into Asgard, returning after being gone for so long. You get the characters of Loki reintroduced. You get to see that Loki really is just a piece of narcissism. He's just a big old fat pile of it. Bro's got a statue to himself. He's got a play to himself. You meet Scourge, the replacement to Heimdall. The man who has found Des and Troy. When you put them together, they destroy. Yeah, I think the intro is great. I didn't have a problem with the intro per se.
No, and there's not necessarily a problem with it. I agree. My only note on this is similar to what we said the last time. We're just saying the fulfillment of it, which is that they are now following full on the trope of the superhero universe, where it is reintroduce character, have them fight big baddie, succeed to establish powers, and then have them really enter into the conflict. The only thing notable about this is that the foreshadowing at the beginning of this one was pretty decent with Sultor, as he notes that things are not right. He does not see Odin, and this causes Thor some concern, and this helps lead into the conflict in, I think, a more natural way than maybe some of the other, for example, Guardians of the Galaxy films do. So, but overall, pretty decent. Didn't have a lot of beef with it. Let's talk about Thor, though. He's the main character of this film. What were your thoughts on him being introduced as this same character? Does he have the flaws that we need? Does he have the strengths and the reason to be involved in this plot like we've seen previously?
In my opinion, this movie only does Thor a little bit better than the last one.
That's crazy. Yeah, yep.
You have the thing that's missing from his life, right? His hammer. It goes missing pretty early on. Unfortunately, this isn't really impacted out in such a way that we as the audience feel the loss, if that makes sense. It's like, I lost my hammer. Okay. What is that? Like, he still seems to be just fine. I mean, he's like knocked out, but even Thor with his hammer wasn't unstoppable. And then almost immediately, like a third of the way into the movie, we see, oh wait, he has power outside of the hammer. He can beat the crap out of the Hulk if he so chose to. So the hammer missing, in theory, it is a pretty impactful thing for Thor to be missing his hammer. But in all actuality, there aren't really any situations he's put into where it's like, oh shoot, if I had the hammer, it would actually make this situation all that much better. And then secondarily, I think they do him a little bit better by having him like accept the responsibility of being king. But again, he doesn't really go through any sort of arc. It's just like, oh, Odin's dead, Hela's here, I guess I have to take on the role of king now. Like, there's no sort of denying it from him. It's more of an act out of necessity rather than him fleeing from this responsibility.
And I will say, of the two things you just noted, the second one stuck out to me a lot more, and I'll get to that in a second. Maybe pushing back on the hammer thing so much. I didn't have a huge problem with the hammer, partially because, one, the hammer is a utility, right? It's a tool to be used to help him accomplish his goals. It's not like he had, and this is where the next one, let's just say, goes a little wonky, where it shows some sentimental value and like almost a persona around the hammers. In this one, very much not the case, and there is no representation of that in any way. And so the fact that his tool is broken is like a crap. I don't have this tool, but it doesn't stop him from acting. And you already know he's super strong, right? He's got inhuman endurance, if you will, being able to fight in situations, all that type of stuff. And so you don't get the impression that he's necessarily completely demolished by losing this. But at the same time, you do see, for example, in his fights with, later on, Hulk and other characters that he doesn't have the same ability to combat them that he did with his hammer, whereas hammer was very much a strong tool. So, I mean,
well, what I think,
I don't know that it's a killer for me. I understand it's part of his persona as being Thor, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the comics or any images you see, it's him with his hammer.
Yeah.
So
I think if you really wanted to kind of put a sense of urgency or desperation on Thor's part, instead of rushing the scene where it just goes from Hela shows up, Hela breaks hammer, they call down the Bifrost, you kind of draw that out, maybe just a few minutes, because there are plenty of scenes in this movie that are a waste of time, in my opinion, and you could have dedicated a few extra minutes to a scene where Thor gets the absolute crap beat out of him by Hela, Loki can't do crap, and then or they fight. It's a very brief fight. It could be like 20, 30 seconds. Maybe even 15. The hammer gets broken. As soon as the hammer's broken, Thor's pretty much useless, and Hela beats him up. And then, out of desperation, Loki calls for the Bifrost rather than immediately jumping to call down the Bifrost. And we don't actually get to see the difference between Thor with his hammer fighting Hela and Thor without the hammer fighting Hela. And it's just, and this is going to be common throughout the rest of this movie, and I'll bring it up in the rest of the review. At least I think I will, because I have it written down. You have this sort of pacing problem where Taika Waititi just wants to like rush through these important scenes and then dwell on this stuff that just doesn't even matter to the progression of the story or the characters. And it's like he wants to have his own little side tangents or comments or like comedy skit here, and it's like I don't know what purpose that served the movie here. And I think this is an instance of where he just rushes through something to try to get to the next portion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have to think about that part, because I do think yeah, I'll think about that. I think there is definitely areas where that's 100% true. Ultimately, I think that this is a problem of stakes. That's my biggest problem with this film, is that at the end of the day, Thor's investment in this film isn't clear. In that, I think in previous movies, even though I don't like Thor: The Dark World, right, or Thor the original one, there is at least something going on in regards to stakes, right? You have some motivation that it has a lot of pride that he's trying to overcome and prove himself, right? And this is a big personal barrier for him. Beyond that, I mean, there is the responsibility to be in this role, right? His job, but then he also has his father, he has his brother, he has his mother, and he has his friends, and he has Sif, and all of these people back in Asgard that are tying him to this location and to his responsibilities there. As these films progress, you see less and less of that literally existing here, right? Loki's no longer really attached to Asgard. He kind of does his own thing, right? The Warriors 3 in this movie get killed pretty early on. Sif, we have no idea where the frick she's gone off to. We know that Odin dies pretty early on in this film. We know his mother's already dead. And so at this point, everything that tied him to this location of Asgard and to the people is gone in the film. And so this idea that he has this noble calling to get back to Asgard and to save Asgard, the question is why? And that's not to say there couldn't be good reason for him to go back and save Asgard. But the fact of the matter is they never show us a reason for why he needs to go back to save Asgard other than the pure benevolence of his heart. Even revenge against Hela for killing the Warriors 3 and for having something to do surrounding Odin's death, right? You could make those as compelling reasons for him to go. But of course, he's the good, benevolent hero, so he's not going to act out of revenge. He's going to act out of the goodness of his heart and his strong leadership responsibilities that are taken therein. So basically, the only reason that he's there is a sense of duty. And frankly, I think duty usually falls to the wayside for people when rubber hits the road, unless they have a deeper calling, a deeper meaning that pushes them beyond just, oh, it's my duty to do this. So I don't think that the reason for him even to go back and do all the things that he does is very compelling.
Well, he's Thor. He just does the right thing.
Right, exactly. And that's where you have character development. It's like, all right, character development, he goes from being like, I'm not king to I am king.
Yep.
And accepts that responsibility.
Yep.
Call that character development if you will. It's not much, but it's there, right?
Now, I will say, just like with the last movie, Loki, I think, is the only person who gets true development in this movie. And we can get to that when we get to side characters. But
I have one other person I think does too, but
okay,
we'll get into that too. I agree with you though. Loki is one of the better parts of this film, and they point out the things you as the audience are thinking, which is helpful.
Mhm.
I mean, we might as well get to him because we just went over
Okay.
Thor with a
I think I
hammer,
know
with
what
his
other
own
character you're
hammer.
referring to, by the
Yeah,
way.
I'm sure you do. But let's get to Loki now. So, what are your
Okay.
thoughts on? Actually, no. Let's go back. Let's talk about Odin. Because
Okay.
Odin is the impetus for this film. What are your thoughts on him as a character? Because he's very briefly in, but he's very poignant to the existence of the threat.
Yeah. See, I have mixed feelings with Odin because it's like I guess there's plausible deniability for why he acts the way he does, but he's also so different than he was in the last two movies. And it could be that during this time that he's been away, he's been reflecting on the death of his wife and all of the failures that he had as a father, specifically regarding Hela and what she became. But at the same time, we don't really get any of that as the audience. Like I as the audience have to read into that to get that. It's just like he's there and he dies. He like Obi-Wan's this crap in like less than 30 seconds. And it's like, psych, boys, deal with your horrible sister on your own. I'm not going to tell you jack squat. But you're stronger than me and you can do this.
Right. So this is where I was curious about your summary. In that land that they're in, my understanding is that he wasn't yet dead.
He wasn't.
Where Okay, so where is that's just another
He's
land
in
that he's
Norway.
banished off to.
No, he's
Okay,
just in
that's what
Norway.
I thought.
Yeah, that's
That's
what
what I
Doctor
thought.
Strange said. He said he's in Norway.
Okay, I missed that brief
Oh, okay.
cameo. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's in normal Earth, which is exactly my problem with what he said. I actually think he's more consistent with episode 1, movie 1 Odin than he is with movie 2 Odin, which we already discussed in the last episode. If you want to hear that, he's kind of a train wreck in that one in comparison to as a character. But in this one, at least he had some level of like, oh, I am a wise leader now and I'm trying to do the right thing. But then he gets the oogway, my time has come, time to disappear off into the mist. And it's like, okay, it's almost like as soon as he's gone, Hela's free to come and fight everyone.
And
Which
we're
is
not
like,
actually told how. Like, the only explanation we're given is my presence keeps her at bay.
right.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it's just like, okay, if you're a good father who's trying to like stop this threat from coming, you might say something like, "Hey, bro, why don't you go back to Asgard and get those people ready right now because I'm about to die in 30 seconds and don't give her a platform to teleport right back there with you. Do something because you clearly know what's about to happen and you're just like,
Yeah.
let's look off into the sunset and disappear with my sons because I would rather just die in a moment of bliss and then make you all suffer."
I have done my time. It is time for you to figure things out. I don't give a crap.
Literally, it's just like I find it hard to justify him. I don't think he's a terrible character. I appreciate some of the things that he showed in his brief scene, but at the same time, his death is the cause for everything else that happens after it. So, what are you doing? Like, be a little smarter. Unless you want to admit you're playing the senile old man situation, in which case you're kind of just. Anyways.
Yeah.
It's confusing to say the least. I wish they had done even a line or two more of dialogue. Could have put some sort of hypothetical roadblock in the way to make the situation more manageable. But not a huge killer thing. Just I think it's important to note because that leads into the rest of the problems of this film.
Yep.
Let's talk about Hera. What are your thoughts of the villain of this film?
Hela?
And right after that, if you want to talk about the Grandmaster too, we'll get into that. But we'll start with Hela.
Since we're talking about the characters, I want to talk about themes in this movie real quick because the characters, I think, were an attempt, whether it be unwitting or intentional, at pulling these themes through the rest of the film. And I think one of the themes of this film is that of colonialism and the effects that it has on a people or a world power. Why are you laughing at me? You're such a butt. What the heck is wrong with you?
Just go.
And Hela's character is very much a person who believes might makes right. I'm bigger and stronger than everyone, therefore I ought to continue conquering. Plus, she's the goddess of death, so that helps with it. And you get those elements and characters like the Grandmaster and Korg and Valkyrie You even get those elements in Loki. The problem is they're not executed well at all whatsoever. And so when we talk about Hela's character, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think she's a better villain than Malekith was. Um, she at least has her own motivations, like she spites her dad, but at the same time, it, it's still very weak in my opinion. It's like I'm the goddess of death, therefore I want to kill things. Um, I am the firstborn of Odin, therefore I have a right to the throne, and it's very cookie cutter almost. Like there's a little more depth to her than Malekith, but not very much in my opinion. And like that's it. Like
Right.
there's no sort of like brother sister connection other than oh I'm gonna call you my brother and I'm gonna call you my sister. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing there. So yeah, those are my
Yeah.
thoughts on Hela.
No, I mean, like, and that's exactly right. I think in this scenario, excuse me, they were trying to do a mixture of the two common types of villains we see. One, it's not uncommon to see the villain who is relatable in some way, that there's some motive behind what they're trying to do. And while you understand it, you don't agree with it and you don't think it's the right action to take, right? Almost like good motive, bad execution, or might makes right ends justify the means type scenario, and they do the wrong thing, right? That's one way to do it, and it creates an interesting villain. The other way to do it is to make them very mysterious, very dark, very menacing, very powerful, and just almost like this overwhelming dark force that is coming to destroy you, right? When you have these actual personified villains, this is separate from like natural disaster type antagonist or other types of things, specifically embodied villains. These are the two types of scenarios you see, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a good example of like the dark overpowering one is, for example, Sauron or the Ring Wraiths in Lord of the Rings, right? And you might even hint at like motives or fears or things like that with those characters, but they can still have that overbearing dark force. In this case, it's almost like they tried to meet in the middle and say, oh, she's just this totally evil, bad person. But then she also has some like dark, brooding history that she has motive for doing the things that she does. And at the end of the day, it doesn't mesh together well, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing goes back to what Andrew said. And that is that they kind of rush along everything that you have with her. So even if that character development was good, her character development is very rushed, and you don't get the idea that this is a truly, fully fleshed out, embodied character. It's just a villain who wants to do big, bad things and rule the galaxy, right?
Yeah.
Boom. That's it. So, yeah, very disappointing, to be honest. And while it is better than Malekith, so there's something, maybe that's why it was so nice in the theater. You're like, wow, this movie's so good. Why? Because Thor 2 was so bad. So, it was a step above, but how much more of a step above? Questionable. What are your thoughts on the Grandmaster, though?
I mean, before I get to the Grandmaster, on along the lines of like why this was more enjoyable, I think this movie just in general is a very enjoyable movie to watch. It's very like visually pleasing, if that makes sense. All right,
Sure.
you've
Hmm.
got these epic scenes with like Thor at the beginning, Thor getting his powers at the end and fighting off the armies of the dead. You get Thor versus Hulk. All right, it's a great scene, probably the best part of the movie. It's just it's like this movie was made just so they could have those specific scenes, and the rest of the movie was just built around them being able to put certain sequences on the screen, and they didn't
Hmm.
care much for the storytelling. Now, on to the
Yeah.
Grandmaster. Gosh, I hate the Grandmaster in this movie. There's two reasons why he's so bad in this movie. One, he's not the Grandmaster, and two, he just sucks. In the terms of the story itself, all right, let's take the Grandmaster they provided on his face. He's just a throwaway character. Like he is not that important to the storyline, other than oh, I'm the monarch. Like we could have gotten the same amount of uh, um what's the word, material. He could have done the exact same things that he did by simply being an ambiguous monarch. We didn't need the
Hmm.
caricature of the Grandmaster.
Right.
He also sucks because he's not the Grandmaster. Um, the Grandmaster is an elder of the universe. He's super powerful, but in this one, he's just like a guy with a melty stick. I mean, if you think about it, in this movie, This man is a Roman emperor. He is on the daily putting down political uprisings and revolutions. He's got political prisoners. Korg is like a guy who led a communist uprising and is in prison for his political crimes. And it gets turned into a throwaway line. And so, like, there's all this stuff going on. And it's like Taika Waititi was just like, I want to make this sound fancy. So we're going to throw some political jargon in here and leave it at that. And so you get the throwaway line about Korg not printing enough flyers for his proletariat uprising. It's just like, okay, interesting. Yeah. I mean, if you want to make the proletariat out to be absolute morons, then sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, I don't think it's supposed to embody a very sophisticated society. But,
true.
You know, I think it's an interesting critique. But keep going.
Yeah, I just think, like, for someone who has so many things going for him, they just make him out to be an idiot who is horny and wants to have lots of sex, and that's why they have the line about him having orgies on his private plane ship thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like the Grandmaster could be so much more menacing, and the same goes for the Collector, by the way. But he's not in these movies, so we're not going to critique him. But the Grandmaster is, it's kind of disappointing in terms of characters in this movie.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I actually like him as a character, but here's the thing. I think he's interesting because he's not super strong. I think he's a very interesting contrast to Hela. Now, granted, Grandmaster isn't a huge villain in this film. The only thing he serves as a purpose of is this side quest that they go on to introduce Hulk to the team in this movie. And the whole side quest, as a personal peeve, is that I don't think it serves a ton of purpose for the actual issues of the film, other than it is the path that Thor is forced down that he has to navigate through to get back to his home. So it felt a little drawn out and unnecessary, but it wasn't inorganic enough that you couldn't say it shouldn't be there, right? And it wasn't like, for example, episode 8, where they go off to the gambling planet and you come back and you go, there was literally no point to all of that. Literally no point. It wasn't like that. They actually had some point, but it felt like out there, far away from the main plot. Yeah. That being said, the Grandmaster I thought was interesting because he's not super powerful. He's not super, nuanced. He's clearly a guy who just wants to have a good time and make his money, and he's a little corrupt, right? He's going to make the people win in his stadium who he wants to win, and things like that. And so his power, while not super powerful, came in different forms and created a different type of conflict than what you maybe normally get. And I at least appreciate villains that clearly have weaknesses, that there is a way to defeat them, versus someone who's like, I am so powerful and you cannot defeat me, right? Even Sauron from Lord of the Rings, even though he's an uber powerful villain, has one very clear flaw. It's said from the beginning of the movies, there is this ring and it must be thrown into Mount Doom, right? And that is the whole impetus of the story. So I think that, especially in contrast to Hela, who's just like so incredibly powerful and can defeat entire armies on her own, but just likes to have undead for the heck of it, and then wants to rule Asgard for who knows what because she just wants to kill people. It's a good contrast, and at least had some merit to it compared to her. That being said, he didn't really boost the villain rating next to anything, so I just kind of liked him. I thought he was funny, and I thought he was actually kind of interesting.
I suppose. I was disappointed. I mean, along the same lines, by the way, of the side quest, I think it's an example of where they just went, World War Hulk. Hulk's a gladiator. We like this idea. Are we going to explore this to its fullest extent and actually make something cool? No. We just want to see Hulk and Thor fight. So we're going to have them go on this whole side quest that has nothing to do with fighting Hela. And we're just going to get this one good scene here, which I think proves my point that this movie is built around specific sequences they wanted you to see as the audience. And one of the, like, if you watch the trailer is built around Thor and Hulk fighting. That was their way of advertising this movie. And so the advertisement was, one, Thor loses his hammer. Big reveal right in the trailer. Hammer's broken. The second one, Thor versus Hulk. Those were their two selling points. And
Mhm.
so those two things, they have them visually, they're stunning. And the thing is I wasn't allowed to watch like most Marvel movies until like 2016, 2017 when Civil War and this movie came out. So I like the way that the trailer plays out, I very vividly remember. And I remember thinking, okay, this movie is going to be about Thor losing his hammer and Thor fighting Hulk. And turns out, no, it wasn't. That was just a throwaway scene.
Yeah,
Um,
because most of those things at the end of the day don't really even matter. Like, as much as we
yeah,
like Bruce Banner, he doesn't really change the outcome of anything in this film other than comedic relief. And yeah,
yep. And we couldn't have him in Civil War because that would be an unbalanced fight.
you would unbalance the teams. It's not fair.
Exactly.
Yeah. What was your thoughts on him? Do you have any notes on Bruce Banner? I don't have a lot beyond what I just said. So
That's about it.
yeah, I thought
He's there
so.
because he's a big green guy who can fight in the gladiator
Yeah.
arena with Thor and wouldn't get pummeled in an instant.
Yeah, and we already know him. And he's one of those, I will say, maybe one of the reasons this was so popular is the same reason, for example, the third Spider-Man movie with Tom Holland was popular, is that there's a lot of cameos in this movie. A lot of oh, look at this. This is Incredible Hulk. Oh, look at this. This is Doctor Strange. Oh, look at this. This is a reference to this other character that you know of. Oh, look at this. This is a reference to the Infinity Gauntlet. All of these things are being shown as examples of, oh, look, this and this and this and this. And if you're a fan, you go, oh, I know that. Oh, I know that. And this was in the deep area where like they were really building up to Infinity War. And so everything was really intertwined at that point. And so the cameo part could definitely appeal to a lot of people. I know for me it did when we first watched it, but that doesn't make a good movie. It
Yeah,
will make fans excited in the moment, but it won't make the movie last the test of time.
yeah.
Anyways, what about Loki? You clearly have a little bit of enjoyment around this character and his development. What did you think at this point in the franchise about him?
Well, I think if the viewers can't tell at this point, Loki is probably one of my favorite characters in the MCU, and there's a reason for that. Aside from Winter Soldier, I think he's probably one of the most compelling characters in the entire universe at this point. I think Iron Man's also pretty high up there in terms of his character development, but I think in terms of the Thor movies, Loki is easily the most compelling.
Hmm.
Um, this movie, I think, is the culmination of his arc. It is the finalization of his becoming the hero that he will be in Infinity War. And even though Infinity War he dies pretty early, like literally within the first 10 minutes, that is truly just the termination of what these last three movies has been doing for his character development. And in this movie, he starts out impersonating Odin. He is no longer the power, like he is no longer like this addict who cannot control his urges anymore. He has reached a point where he is kind of comfortable doing his own thing. And he even talks to Thor. He's like, I don't need to go back to Asgard. I'm comfortable here on Sakaar. Like, I'm fine. I
Right.
don't need that anymore. Um, and to the point where he finally realized it's like he is going on the journey that Thor went on in the first movie, but it's a little more drawn out for him. And so in this movie, he finally learns the value of sacrifice, self sacrifice, and what it means to be able to put others before yourself. And that's why, in the end, even though he is betraying Thor up until the end when they're on Sakaar, he does bring that ship back to go and help save the rest of the Asgardians, um, and help Thor fight off their sister, Hela. And so and of course, the thing that I love about it is they still stick true to his character. He still has this devious, mischievous side to him, where he still does take the Tesseract with him when he leaves Asgard. But that doesn't mean that he isn't getting to the point where he is learning what sacrifice means. And so I think that in terms of character development, I think every scene with Loki is kind of slowly showing one, what has kind of happened to him as he's kind of impersonated Odin, but also showing where he's at this point in his life. It's supposed to have been about 10 years since the first movie came out, the first Thor, when this movie comes out.
Yeah.
Not 10 years, probably like 8 years, but still, it's a decent amount of time. And Loki's been through a lot. So even though he's a side character, I think that all the scenes he's in, he again steals the show. You have the scene where he's watching Thor and Hulk fight, and he gets really into the fight when he sees Hulk slamming Thor around. You have the get help scene. You have him visiting Thor in the dungeon. You have him confronting Valkyrie. You have him showing up on the Bifrost and telling the Asgardians their savior has arrived. And he's like, yes, worship me, people. I have sacrificed my time and effort for you.
Right.
So even his scenes with Doctor Strange, I think they're great. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Loki, if Loki was the only side character, I'd probably give this almost full points because, he's not like the best side character.
Sure. No, but he's pretty solid, and I'd agree with that. You see his arc; it's almost like Loki's arc is much more similar to a TV show than it is to a movie, and that's
Yeah.
because you see it is not based off of this one film; it's based off of the other three. The other two Thor films plus the other films that he's been in all of the MCU, right? And you see him becoming this person who's going from being a villain to being some devious but still good character. And unlike if you watched Once Upon a Time, there was the Rumpelstiltskin character who
Oh,
ended up being
yes.
absolutely demolished over and over again because
I
he
was
couldn't help
thinking
himself.
the exact same thing.
Just rinsing and repeating over and over again. This guy's good. No, he's not. No, he's good. No, he's not. Like, they just could not help themselves because they couldn't think of anything else to do with him. In this case, they actually have reasonable progression for his character so that by the time you get to the Loki seasons in his own show, he actually has a complete comprehensive arc that doesn't just fold itself in half and throw itself in the trash.
Yep.
So it's pretty good. And I think they even point out this is like the if there was a tipping point, this film is that for him, where you see Thor point out to him, hey, I knew you were going to do this because you always do this. This is who you are. And you need to either rise above this or this is going to be the way it is. Goodbye, and then leaves. And, Loki kind of has that moment where he has to think about that and realize that, hey, he's right. This is what's going to happen. And so, I think is very good at acknowledging both what the audience is thinking and then what Thor knows to be true and embodying it in that scenario that we saw. So, yeah, Loki's great. And this was a great example of continuing his character development in the films. What were your thoughts on Valkyrie?
They just wanted a badass lesbian. That was it. That was literally it. I don't even care if you have to filter that out. Like, that pissed me off because it was like, you already have a really cool female warrior character. Her name is Sif. Why wasn't she in this movie? Why was she gone? She wasn't even with the Warriors 3. She wasn't even with Heimdall. She's just gone. And then in Thor 4, she is just being an idiot who loses her arm. And that's it. And it's like, and we'll talk about this more if I'm here when we talk about Infinity War and Endgame, but I think her character is stupid. I wish her character did not exist in the Thor movies.
Wow.
She takes away from the movies, in my opinion. It's not even that she just doesn't add to them. I think she actively is taking away from the story that is there. There's potential there. Like, there's the last of the Valkyrie. She could be running away. She is a failed Aragorn stereotype. That is what she is. She was meant to be this Aragorn type character who's running from her responsibility. But the thing is, her returning to her responsibility just jack diddly squat. It doesn't add to the story. Like, when Aragorn comes back from being a runaway ranger and reclaims the throne of Gondor, it is an epic moment. It turns the tide of that battle where he brings back the army of the undead. When she comes back, there's some cool fireworks on an orgy spaceship and she walks along the Rainbow Bridge and that's it. She's just an extra warm body and it pisses me off. All she did in this movie that actually added value was she helped to capture Thor and turn him into the Grandmaster, which could have been anyone.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a fair point at the beginning. I'm obviously going to push back pretty hard because I think Valkyrie. Now, granted, in the other films, I don't think Valkyrie is a great character. I think she definitely takes away from the next Thor movie, Thor: Love and Thunder, which was Dogwater. If you want to hear that review, that was an early on one we did way back when it first came out, and it does not deserve its time of day. But in regards to this film, when she's first introduced, I actually think she has an interesting arc, and we'll get to your second point about its impact in a minute. But first, let's talk about the character itself. Now, Valkyrie, as a character, has a couple of interesting things. Like you see at the beginning, she's an alcoholic. She's got this trauma in the past, and for her, she believes that she should just run away from her past and live out her life until she dies in a miserable way. And more or less, this story is telling the arc of someone who is gone from, hey, you have given up on life, you don't see meaning and purpose in it, to you had a purpose and you have rejected that out of fear and out of loss and mourning. And whether or not you succeed, the importance is to push through and accept the past and move on from it, right? And that is important, not because of her specifically. That is important because I actually think that that is one of the messages they were trying to convey in this film as a whole. Not just in Valkyrie, but also in Loki, in him trying to overcome his past and realize who he has been and how he needs to rise above that and become someone better. And also in Thor himself, as he sees this thing about the throne that he had first accepted and then rejected, coming back to him and realizing he has to accept that responsibility as well. And that is the point, is that not that any one of these characters ends up defeating Hela, but it is because everyone steps forward and takes on their responsibility that they are actually able to achieve their goal of defeating their enemies. Does it actually terminate in a fully satisfying way? No, not at all. I'm not going to say that. But what I will say is that her arc actually helps is compelling on its face, and embodied with everyone else actually contributes to the end of the film.
I would still disagree. I like, she's a drunk. Like I said, there is potential there. She's a
drunk. There's potential there.
There is potential in terms of her character from the outset, but as the story progresses, she again just becomes a throwaway character. When you think about this movie, right? You think, what were their goals with this movie? I think Taika Waititi's goal with this movie was to have a fight between Thor and Hulk, and that was it. And he didn't care what the heck else happened. And you can see that with his directing of the second Thor movie. And I don't know why they kept him on. I mean, clearly people enjoyed the Hulk and Thor fight. I enjoy watching this movie, okay? I still enjoy watching this movie. Only because of the fight between Thor and Hulk. I don't think this is a good movie. And there's the one cool shot where Thor's coming down from the sky covered in lightning. But you just throw away all of the characters that had been building up to this. The only characters we really get that have still been around are Thor and Loki. Like, Heimdall is a fugitive. He's kind of there. He's there at the end. Odin dies. The Warriors 3 all die. Sif isn't even present. Frigga's been dead. Like, all of the lineup for this movie, they're all new characters. And it's like Taika Waititi just wanted to tell his own story using the Thor and Hulk fight, and just created his own characters to fit that narrative. And he pulled from World War Hulk, and he pulled from Ragnarok. But it's very disappointing for me as the audience, as someone who also wants to see a good story, when you're watching a trilogy, for you to just switch the pace on that trilogy so quickly and so suddenly without any warning. It's like, oh, we have these 3 warriors. We need to figure out how to explain what happens to them. Okay, Hela shows up and kills all 3 of them instantly. Boom, done. We've had that explained. We don't need to worry about them for the rest of the movie.
Right.
What happened to Sif? We're not even going to bother with her. She's just not here right now. And so it's like, we didn't need all of these new characters that had some potential but never got fully explored, when we had characters who had already been partially developed and who we could have actually gotten more into their character development in this movie, rather than going and you can filter this out it with these ones or going half the way and not actually fully terminating their arc. So yeah, I think that the reason I think Valkyrie ultimately takes away from this movie is because she's unnecessary to begin with, and if you're not going to fully explore and terminate the themes that she's meant to be exploring for us as the audience, there's no point to put her in the beginning to begin with.
Sure. I mean, obviously that would be true. I just disagree that they don't terminate. Like, I think that her arc does terminate at the end of the film. Is she the most compelling character in the film? Absolutely not. But I do think she's given adequate time to develop, and that her arc does have a completion in this case. Was she obviously also meant to carry on into future films and contribute to those? Of course. And does she do well in those specifically? No, I don't think so. But in this case, I think that they do her well, and of all the characters they add in this film, this one was one that I don't think deserves to be riffed on, which we obviously disagree on.
Well, my second question then for you is this. At what point do you think that Valkyrie is convinced that she ought to change her ways? After decades, if not, because at this point, Thor is almost 1,500 years old, which means
Mhm.
Valkyrie's fight with Hela, 1,500 years old.
Yeah.
What do you think was the compelling reason for her to break 1,500 years of drunken habit and running away to go confront Hela again, the person who took everything from her?
It's literally the conversation that she and Thor have, where he goes like, basically, you're running away from this past, and it's not going to get any better if you just continue to do it here. And she basically spits in his face and says, hey, this is the life I want. I choose this. And then she comes to ponder that and realizes, you know what? He's right. And I do want to come and face this, even if it means that I die. Right. That conversation is what causes that. And her arc is pretty, like, in the grand story of the 2 hour and 15-minute movie, right? Her arc is probably one and done in an hour, right? Or 45 minutes, right? From where you see her to where she goes, okay, you know what? You're right. I'm going to help you guys leave the planet and solve this problem, right?
Yeah.
So,
I
not
just
like the most nuanced character, but it is completed and it happens at that moment.
Yeah, I guess I just don't think that that's a very compelling reason for her to break that 1,500 years of habit of running for this one guy to come up to her and say, this isn't going to work. Like, I feel like if you've lived for 1,500 years, you would have considered that yourself. I guess I just don't see that as a very compelling
Sure,
switch
I
for
mean,
her.
if you don't find it compelling, that's fine. I mean,
Hmm.
I think it is, but I think part of it is because she's still nihilistic. It's not like her character as a whole is completely different because she chooses to do that. It was more she needed the kick in her butt to say, "Hey, let's change something," but it wasn't one that went. She didn't even expect to live through the fight. She says in her conversation, even if I die, acknowledging that I'm actually trying to do something and face what happened rather than just running away from it. So I don't feel like it's a huge change and shift for her. It's just a step in a natural progression of a nihilistic person toward some meaning or purpose in their life versus no meaning and purpose in their life.
Sure.
Anyways, we could go on and on
Yeah.
about Valkyrie, but I think you get the idea of both of our opinions on this. If you disagree, we always love the comments, so leave one on the
Or we
video.
don't. Sometimes they can be stupid. So,
We do get a lot of stupid comments, but
um,
that's fine.
yeah,
Is
those are the side characters. I think we covered them pretty well.
Yeah. So, ending thoughts on the film. What are your thoughts on how they finished it up? The themes of the film? Did the movie
Okay.
leave you satisfied, Andrew?
No.
What?
See, another problem I have is I think the Marvel movies try to get political, right? They have the politics of like unchecked power with Civil War and like whether or not governments are the right people to be the ones to have that check on superheroes' power. They have the implications of Wakanda and like essentially being a colonialistic empire in Black Panther that they kind of explore. They also explore like the impacts of slavery in the Black Panther movie when Killmonger is basically telling Black Panther when he dies, like, throw me, what is he? I have it written down. He says, just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors who jumped from the ships because they knew death was better than bondage. It's like they have these very cool lines of dialogue and these very cool themes they could explore. I think Thor is very much trying to kind of, it's like they just want to touch this surface. They just want to pet it. They want to like scratch it. Just like, oh, colonialism bad, obviously. But like there's so much there we could have done. Like we could have, why did Odin suddenly switch from being this warmonger who conquers the nine realms, because from Hela's perspective, he just flips on a dime, and from Odin, we get nothing. We don't even. He never talks about being a warmonger. All we know is he says that a good king should know when to not, like, he should not seek out war, but always be ready for it. And so you have this dichotomy between Hela and Odin, this whole like conflict they had that's never explored. All we get is Hela's perspective, and I think Hela to some extent is meant to be the uh, alternative to Thor. She is the version of Thor that never learned the lessons Odin tried to
Right.
impart to her.
Exactly. Yeah.
And on her end, it was difficult for her because she saw a version of Odin that was exactly like her. And she's like, now you're a hypocrite for trying to tell me to stop.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in terms of all of these themes they're going for, they just don't execute them well. It's like they are trying to like put them in the background and world build, but not in such a way that's very satisfying to the audience.
Yeah.
And so it kind of gets lost. It just gets lost in the countless jokes that are being thrown around in this movie. And I think Taika Waititi just really wanted to make a movie with Hulk versus Thor and make it a comedy, and everything else kind of just got put on the back burner.
Yeah. I mean, I generally agree with that. I don't know that it's necessarily fully political. I mean, those weren't the themes I took out, partially because maybe I wasn't in the mind of colonialism, but like I could see how you got that theme out of it. So I don't disagree with it at all. My only note was it was more a lot of the themes I saw out of it were about facing your past and facing responsibility, rising into the roles that are thrust upon you or that you see are required of you, right? And accepting those and moving forward with those rather than trying to hide or move away from those responsibilities. So, and like I said, we have an almost perfect character of Thor that's embodying these, so the themes don't terminate super well when you don't see the main character grow that much as a person. But those were the attempts they were going at in what I saw, and they were completed, if you will. But the film itself was, like at the end of the day, Surtur coming and destroying Asgard was. It was fine. I mean, it was a fine ending. The only thing I will note about that I somewhat appreciated was that the nuance between Thor seeing Asgard as the people and seeing the value being in the people versus Hela seeing it as the location. And she's just losing her mind when Surtur's destroying the place. She's like, no, this can't happen.
Well,
Because she
also,
that for her represents her power.
well,
Right.
it is her power. Is what
Right.
Odin. It's like she physically draws power from Asgard.
Right.
So, although that also wasn't explained very well. So,
Yeah, it was pretty much like this is her source of power. Bam. Done. So, anyways, other than that, meh. Do I think this movie will stand the test of time? I don't know, Andrew. Do you think the movie will stand the test of time?
I think the fight between Hulk and Thor will be something that people will look back on YouTube for. And that's
Sure.
probably about it. Like, the fight's awesome, okay?
It
you
is,
can't
yeah.
deny that. The fight
Yeah.
is insane. Rest of the movie? No.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to see a cool 1v1 fight, just watch the commercial for the new Noxus Season 1 that came out. That'll be...
True.
You'll get
I would
just
watch
as good.
that over this fight any day. Trundle and Darius going at it. Oh,
yeah,
let's
that's very nice. Yeah, so that's what we got. I don't know if there's any parting thoughts you want to leave the audience with for this one, but I think we pretty much wrapped the movie up.
Before I forget, real quickly, I do actually enjoy the character of Scourge in this movie. That was the character I thought you were referring to when you said you liked their development. And even though it's so little that you get from Scourge, I think that he has a more complete arc than Valkyrie.
Wow, that's crazy. That is such BS. You're a piece of crap for that.
You get this character he goes through this whole arc of wanting power and wanting glory and wanting prestige and doing whatever he can to get that. And then as he follows Hela around, he realizes what doing anything to get power looks like. And he realizes this is so wrong. This is not what I should be doing. And then he learns that he ought to sacrifice. And sure, he's a side character of all side characters. He's like the side character of a side character. But at least he has a full arc.
Bro. His full arc is barely there. It is there, but it's barely there. The guy's freaking giving dead bodies the side eye for 90% of the film and then just goes, you know what, you're right, this is wrong.
Plus, it's Éomer.
Yeah, that's the bigger point. It's like, I would love to see any semblance of Lord of the Rings to give this movie a little bit more value.
It was Éomer and Galadriel teaming up, bro. I don't know how you can go wrong with that.
If she looked a little more like Galadriel, we might be talking. But no, yeah. Her crown, I know it's like more. It looks. My understanding is that it looks as true to the comics, but I think it makes her character look just so
Goofy.
weird. Yeah.
She got that goofy crown.
Yeah, unlike when they did with, they revamped Spider-Man villains and made them look kind of cool, even though they look campy in the comics.
Mhm.
In this case, she just looked still campy.
Anyways,
Yeah.
that's all I have. I just wanted to throw that out there because I genuinely thought you were going to say Scourge, and then you said Valkyrie, and I was like, oh boy, this is going to be one of those podcasts where we disagree.
I mean, when do we not? There's got to be at least one thing.
At least there's no Marty McFly.
Yeah, the Thor 2 was an anomaly. You got to get used to the butting of the heads here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's it. That's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed because we barely did. But we'll be back as we always are next week. Yep. We'll see you all then.